Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I'll tell you what, for this Mindset and Motivation Monday episode, we are all going to level set with each other that we all have those days, we all have those moments, whether those are short moments or long moments where we say, what the heck am I doing all this stuff for? What the heck is the reason that gets me out of bed? Why am I even trying to start a business? What is it about my life that I'm hoping to accomplish? Well, today's guest is really going to bring all of that stuff to the surface from us and not only guide us to the point where we ask those questions, but hopefully guide us to the point where we start knowing how to find those answers. So let me tell you about today's guest. He's someone that I've been so excited to talk to. His name is Tanner MacIvor. 10 years ago, Tanner was focused on making money and having more experiences. So he went into banking to make money, and then he shifted to consulting to make money while traveling. He was constantly comparing himself to his peers, as we all do. This is what it means to be human. He was chronically stressed, and he was living for the weekends. One night, he broke down and wrote down what his dream life looked like. After realizing his current path would not get him there, he started taking steps to align to his dream life. He started dating his now fiancée, Kelly. He moved out to Montana. He switched drinking in bars with skiing and hiking, and he started on tourist coaching, where now he helps others live a purposeful life as well. This guy's message is super powerful. So excited for it to get us started in this week of content. So I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Tanner MacIvor. All right, Tanner, I'm so excited that you're here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm beyond excited. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Heck yeah. Obviously, I tooted your horn a little bit to start this episode off, but I always love hearing the guests take us beyond the bio in their own words. Tell us, who the heck is Tanner? How did you start doing all these cool things? And give us that backstory that led to you being here.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the introduction. Who is Tanner? I'm a coach. How did I get there? It was a windy road, Brian. I went from banking to Deloitte Consulting to Optum. I've moved from New York City to Denver to Montana. And ultimately, the road was amazing. There was some bumps, but I can't complain about anything because it led me to where I am now, which is a coach, helping people that have done all of the right things, yet are unhappy and burnt out. And now I get to wake up every day doing what I love. So that's a little about me. I'm looking forward to diving in.
Yeah, I love that, Tanner, especially because I feel like in life, and you have it right there in your bio about comparing ourselves to others. It's something that we all do from time to time. And now that I'm, old and grizzly and in my mid-30s, I've seen how I've matured, not only as an entrepreneur, but especially as a person. And that's something that we get better at over time, or so I think, probably better at through intention and through being disciplined about that. But walk us back to that, because a lot of people would look at your past life and say, well, Tanner, that was the dream, working in consulting. You were probably taking fancy flights and staying in fancy hotels and eating at fancy restaurants, of which someone was paying for it for you. So that looks like the dream life outwardly. I was an economics and finance major. I know that you have a similar academic background where you were always business and career oriented. And I thought that was the dream. How did that dream turn into you saying, there's something else that I want?
Yeah, great question. And I think everybody sells you on that dream. I went to Williams College, and that was the dream, right? It was banking or consulting. That is really where people pushed you. And there are a ton of positives. I have a bunch of friends that are bankers and consultants, and it works for a lot of people. I think how that wasn't necessarily the dream for me was I wasn't fulfilled. I looked up at my bosses, and they were amazing people, but I didn't want to live their life. I didn't want to constantly be traveling, even though the dinners were amazing. That didn't make up for being away from family. So I think that people sell you on that life, and then you do everything you possibly can to get that life. And then the question is, okay, do I actually want that life? And one day I was just doing PowerPoints, doing Excel till midnight, and I broke down and I asked myself, is this actually the life I wanted? And that realization sparked I don't think it is, but what life do I want? And then from there, I started mapping out what life I wanted. And that really started Entourage coaching. That was really the precipice. I didn't know it at that point, but that's what got me towards the purposeful life that I have now.
Yeah, well, I want to go there right off the bat. Let's just jump straight into it, because you mapped out what your dream life looked like. What did that entail? Were you thinking career, family, geography, cars? Like, what was it when you thought about what's my dream life? What did that actually look like for you?
Yeah, great question. I actually post my 10 years every year. So it's in my newsletter because I want to share. And my dream life really consisted of both personal and professional, financially independent. I describe what that means in my 10-year goals. I wanted a family in 10 years. And now I have an amazing fiance, Kelly, and we're talking about kids and what that looks like. I wanted to wake up every day and love what I did. So there were aspects of it that I'm still working towards, and there are aspects of it that I've hit. So it's all published. I'm happy to share it also if we want to link to that. But that it's personal, it's professional, it's all of the above, Brad.
Yeah, listeners, there's an early spoiler alert for you. You already know you'll be able to find the links in the show notes, wherever it is that you're tuning in. We'll talk about those all at the end. I love how generous you are with sharing that, Tanner. And I'm also going to call out one big caveat that I love that you threw into your answer before, which was the dream life for me. And I think it's so important for us to always ask ourselves that question of the dream life for me. It's not anybody else's dream, and nobody else has to live this life. So I better set it up for me. What did that look like? Because Tanner, I'll be totally transparent here on the air, is that there are days where I question, because obviously we as entrepreneurs, we choose a hard path. It's not an easy path. And I would argue there are very few easy paths in life, but there are days where I'm just like, man, why couldn't I have just been happy working a 9 to 5? All my college friends, they all have a paycheck every single week. They have benefits. They have all of these things. What is it that makes me different? Where did your mind go in those moments where you seemingly accomplished the dream life for others that made you realize that your dream life is different? And how did you get comfortable with that fact?
Yeah. So it's all about priorities. So let me break down kind of the 3 steps that I see in crafting this life. The first step is realization. So you need to realize, wow, this life maybe isn't right for me. I am not as happy as I want to be. I don't have as much flexibility. And for some of you listening, maybe your life is awesome. That's fantastic. Keep living it. Like, that is the best case scenario. You achieved it. But the first step is really realization. The second step is discovery. What do you want it to look like? And that might go against status quo, and that is okay. And there are some negatives to that, and maybe some outgrowing of friend groups and different things you're doing. But the discovery is really, what does it look like? And then finally is implementation, right? It's creating the systems, creating the processes in order to get to that life. So that's the process. I don't know if that answered your question, Brian. So we can circle back to it, or I can dive into any of those 3 stages.
Yeah, it does answer the question. You're right. It leads us right into where we're going in this conversation, because one thing that I love about the way you talk about your work is part of your job is asking questions. And I'm sure that there are questions along the way. So I guess we'll start with those 3: realization, discovery, and implementation. What are some of those questions that kickstart each of those 3 processes?
Yeah, so let's start all the way with realization. You can just ask yourself, am I happy? Is this the life that I want to live? Is this the life that I want to live in 10 years? Will it get me to the life I want to live in 10 years? So those are some of the questions you can ask in the realization. The discovery is pretty simple. Where do I want to be? Where do I want to go, personally and professionally? Also, a quick note, I joke about this with all my clients. Everything I say is simple, but not easy, right? So it's simple to have a 6-pack. You eat healthy, you go to the gym, and it's ridiculously hard. So a lot of these things I'm going to say are simple on paper, and it's hard to do. So for discovery, the real questions are, where do I want to go? What do I want my personal life to look like? What do I want my professional life? How much flexibility do I really want? And then once you outline that, it's what's the best way to get there? How can I make steps every single day and put in processes that make my life easier to get closer and closer to that vision and enjoy the journey along the way?
Yeah, I love that. And I think the six-pack analogy is just so pertinent and relevant here because you're right. We know the exact ingredients to get there, but we complicate them along the way because we are humans and this is what we do in life. I want to ask you this, speaking of those complications, where do we go wrong? Because this stuff is so simple at its real root. Where is it that people get it wrong? Is it people aren't willing to do that introspective work to come to that realization process? Or do your clients, because I know you work with people from all different walks of life, is it in the discovery phase where they're just like, Tanner, I have no idea what I want?
Yeah, spoiler, most people don't know what they want, and that's okay. That's why we start there. Where do people go wrong? I don't know if I would use wrong as the right word, and I know you didn't mean it that way, Brian. But I don't know if I'd use wrong. I'd say, where is it hard? And really where it's hard is you get to choose your hard. Do you want it to be hard now, where you're putting in daily work, which makes your life maybe amazing in 10 years, 5 years, whatever it is? Or do you want to keep going status quo, maybe not really love what you do things because your parents or your friends or whoever told you that this was the right way to go, and then your hard is later? I think it's really choosing your hard. Is it now? Is it later? And I think where people struggle is the systems and the processes to stick with it. I mean, I look at your podcast and I'm blown away. Brian, I hate to break it to you, you're probably not an overnight success, right? You've been doing this for 7 years, which is phenomenal. And it's why you have over 800 episodes, and it's why you're absolutely crushing it. But you had to put in systems and processes to do this day in and day out. And I think that is the hardest part, is that small incremental gain every single day.
Yeah, amen to that. And thank you for the kind words, Tanner. Yes, full disclaimer for all of you tuning in here today is that Tanner is absolutely correct. We've been at this for many years. Our processes and systems have gotten better over the years. We had none out of the gates for like 2+ years. We had none of those. So I love the fact that you call that out, Tanner. And it's an iterative process. And that's part of when we talk about the nature of the work that you do, part of what makes it digestible for me is just that recognition of this is iterative. I don't have the answers today. I will not have the answers tomorrow, but I will be on a constant path of figuring it out. With that in mind, talk to us about that, because I mean, you kicked off the conversation with regards to the realization phase of, am I happy? And part of me is just like, well, I'm happy 98% of the time, but that also is, there are peaks and valleys throughout that entire thing. So to people sitting there saying, Tanner, you could ask me that question every day and get a different answer. How do we make sense of that in a fluid world?
Yeah. So the reason I named my company Treacherous is because it means the journey in Scottish Gaelic. And the journey is what matters. So yes, there are going to be times that we are unhappy. We actually need unhappiness to be happy. We could go down that rabbit hole. But we actually need both. And that's okay. And enjoying the journey along the way is really what we're trying to get after. So Brian, 98%. I'd say great job. Keep it up, man. You check the box. I think where I really like to work with people is when they're burnt out, when they're really unhappy a lot of the time, and they just don't know why. Not sure if that answered your question, Brian, but hopefully it did.
Yeah, it did, because we're also going to go into somewhere I've never gone in this podcast history, which is a quote from 50 Cent, where he said that sunny days wouldn't be special if it wasn't for rain. Joy wouldn't feel so good if it wasn't for pain. And Tanner, you just brought up basically the same concept of we need the bad to complement the good. And obviously there's so many historical, philosophical beliefs out there, the yin and the yang. Talk to us about why that's so prevalent in the work that you do, and of course, your mindset that comes along with it.
Yeah, the yin and the yang. I like that. So the dopamine seesaw is really where I go back and forth to, is whenever we have a really great time, every once in a while it needs to even out, right? It's why we get addicted to social media. We look at it, we love it, and then we kind of have a come down from that. So that yin and the yang is chemical a lot of the time. And I think when I think of, okay, where do we want to be? Where do we want to go? It's holistically, like let's paint the picture of financially, personally, that we want to be at. And along the way, there's going to be ups and downs. When we get to that beautiful picture, there's going to be ups and downs. And we can enjoy the ups and downs. We can constantly be present, and we can constantly, I like to say, embrace boredom, embrace tough times. And that is a common theme also across my coaching.
Yeah, Tanner, I'll tell you what, when I have these conversations with amazing entrepreneurs like you, where my head goes, because I love language, I love words, and the word that keeps popping out the more you say it is and. You keep saying, I can love this and that. We can do this and that. When we get to where we think we want to go, it will also still be hard. It's always and. All of these things are coexisting. Talk to me about the way that that shows up, because I would say that's counter to the way that societally we're really meant to believe the world works, is that this is either good or bad. This is this or that. Clearly, you have a different approach, and it's so deeply ingrained in the way that you think about it that I don't know if you're conscious of it or not, but it so shows up in the way you talk about these things publicly. How does that factor into your mindset?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if I was aware of it, but I agree with it. I think one thing to note is I'm imagining a lot of people listening want to become entrepreneurs, but you don't have to become an entrepreneur to be happy. We have a bunch of clients that love aspects of their job. And it's okay, amazing. If you don't love maybe your job as a whole, is there something in your job that we can double down on? Is there a passion outside of your job that we can double down on? So I think life isn't always going to be perfect, but we can constantly improve. We can constantly try to become happier. We can constantly try to become better people and give back more. And I think you can do that whether you're an entrepreneur, or whether you're working in consulting or banking or wherever you are at whatever stage. And I think that yin and yang then becomes pretty prevalent.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful point, Tanner, and maybe one that people don't expect to hear on an entrepreneurial or a business-minded show, but I think it is so important. Personally, I've never actually talked about this on the air or even talked about it with anyone else, Tanner, but part of what I believe makes entrepreneurs and not entrepreneurs is because a lot of entrepreneurs find that happiness in the growth-minded aspects of entrepreneurship, where they love to learn new things, they love to dive into new tools, and those are the things that stroke their minds. Whether that fulfillment comes in their job or not, it's something that a lot of them do on the side. So I guess that leads me to ask you about that concept, which is a lot of people hope that their work is what gives them fulfillment. I've met so many people along the years. Look at our parents' generation, where they weren't as demanding on their career as maybe our generation is. They were just like, no, I do this between 9 to 5, but I love playing with my kids. I love going to my kids' soccer practice. They had different priorities, which is a word you've already used here today. Talk to us about, in your perspective, having worked with different people, where can those sources of happiness come from if it doesn't have to come from our business or our job?
Yeah, I grapple with this question a lot because I'm fortunate to have purpose and passion in my job. And I don't know if everybody should have that or if there is a middle ground. So I think where my examples goes to is Copenhagen in Denmark. I studied there, and I think they work 32 hours a week, and they absolutely love their life. They're the happiest country in the world. So I think you can find, whether it's working on an entrepreneurial something outside of work, whether it's working on something within work. So when I was part of Deloitte Consulting, I was on the council that focused on business analyst experience. When I was at Optum, I was on what they called the culture committee. So there were things in work that I could coach and mentor and be mentored, and that's what I loved. So I think you can find it outside of work. I think you can find little pockets in work. I think where the burnout comes is when your work starts taking over your life and there are no pockets that give you happiness.
Yeah. All right. Well, then we got to go there. We keep talking about that B word of burnout. Let's talk burnout, Tanner, because I know that it's the catalyst that sparks a lot of people to begin this process and go deeper into the work that you do. How does burnout creep up on us? Because it's not something that happens overnight. What are those factors that lead to burnout? And most importantly, how can we curtail those factors?
Yeah, burnout's a tricky one. I think it's happening more and more. And I think some of the factors are we get into something because somebody else told us that it's the right thing to do, or that's the definition of success. I think expectations and looking around at others is a huge cause of burnout, right? We have social media right now. When we go on social media, we look at all these perfectly curated lives and we say, oh my gosh, my life should be that way, or that person's making this much money, or this person's traveling, or whatever it is. I think that constant comparison to others leads us to say, oh, all I'm doing is working. My life is terrible. I'm not making enough money. I don't have enough things, which then can lead to burnout. But I think how we can get over burnout, I always go back to the change formula. And it actually has kind of all three of the steps that we've talked about already. The change formula is dissatisfaction times vision plus first steps needs to be greater than resistance. So dissatisfied, you're burnt out. Oh my gosh, this is where we are. We've admitted it. We don't know how to change. Well, how we change is we craft the vision. We identify the first steps. And all of those things have to be greater than resistance, which comes in so many different forms. Resistance is, my parents will be upset with me. My friends won't accept me. It's hard. I don't know where to go. Resistance will pop its ugly head everywhere. But really, to get over burnout, those are kind of the three factors we need.
Yeah, I love that. I've actually never heard that formula before, so I love the way that you highlight that for us here today. You keep using also that word hard, and clearly it's something that you embrace in your personal and your professional life. Talk to us about that, because whether it's tied in with resistance or just things are hard in life, and that's a fact of any endeavor that we embark upon, whether it's business, whether it's fitness, whether it's learning a new language, everything's going to be hard along the way. How do you personally, speaking to Tanner, not just the entrepreneur, but the person, how do you embrace those moments of hard? Because it's easy for us to sit here on a podcast episode and talk about it, but in the very moments, that's where it's important to have that resilient mindset. So what's that look like for you?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of gurus out there that just say, suck it up and just do it and use willpower and everything will be all right. And willpower is fleeting. So how I kind of deal with hard is really the James Clear model of I make it as easy as possible. I set up systems. So for me, my focus is just make a little bit of progress in the areas that are important to me every single day. I stole this from Marshall Goldsmith, but I have someone call me every day and ask me 5 questions. They rotate every quarter depending on what I'm focused on. And that's to make sure that every single day I'm just focused on making progress in the areas that I've decided are important to me. And that's how I do it. I try to focus on daily reminders and then systems that can make my life easier. And sometimes it's hard and you just have to push through.
Yeah, I love that. I'll tell you what, Tanner, I feel like we throw that word around so frequently of systems, and it takes all different shapes and sizes. A lot of us, you and I are obviously business minded. We think about systems and processes within the terms of business, but you gave us one real life example of someone calling you every single day and asking you 5 poignant questions. What types of systems can support us in these endeavors as we want to lead a more purposeful life? Because people might be thinking, gosh, Tanner, systems, that's just more work that I'm going to have to do. What do those systems look like?
Yeah, I'm going to back up 1 second before we go to systems. You need to know where you're going first. I know I keep reiterating this, but that is key, because if you set up systems to do things that you ultimately don't want to do or won't get you to where you want to be, well, then they're not getting you to where you want to go. So once we know where we want to go, some of the systems that I try to talk with people about are accountability partners. If coaching isn't for everyone, if you can't afford a coach, you don't want a coach, well, ask a friend. Hey, every day, every week, can we text? How does this look? How does that look? Are you making progress on this? So that's an easy system that we can implement. Little reminders on your desk of what's important. For me, I have one that sits right next to me every day that says, enjoy the passage of time. So it's just these little things that can make our life a little easier. Those are a couple examples.
Yeah, I love those examples, especially because they are actionable. Whether you pointed it out, whether we hire someone or not, these are all things that are accessible to each of us every single day of our lives. But it starts with that choice. And that's why I love that within your work, you talk about a purposeful life. Talk to us about that messaging, Tanner, because I know that nothing in your business has been by mistake. These are all intentional choices that you've made along the way. What is it about? A lot of people will say, I want to help you lead a more rewarding life, a more happy life. But for you, it's all about a more purposeful life. Why is that your messaging? Why is that at the root of everything you do?
I ultimately think purpose brings happiness, brings giving back, brings just a lot of good. And that's why I focus on purpose. I think if you can have a mission that you absolutely love and something you stand behind, everything else falls into place. So that's the focus on purpose for me.
Yeah, I love that overview. I come back to the resistance part of what you shared with us, because I feel like all of these things, they sound good. Like we're all sold on them at a really surface level, but where we start complicating things is resistance, which could be external, but it also could be could also be internal. And along those lines, it's something you and I both teased at the very top of today's episode, is that notion of comparison is the thief of joy. So talking about that, because I just know, knowing our listeners as well as I do, that is one focal point of so much resistance, especially within the world of entrepreneurship, because financially speaking, we don't have that quote unquote same stability. I would argue this very much, but we don't have that perceived stability that maybe a 9-to-5 job has. And that's one way that we compare ourselves to others. Talk to us about comparison, Tanner. 1, why do we do it? And 2, how the heck do we stop doing it?
Great question. Why do we do it? Because we're humans, really, is what it comes down to. How do we stop doing it? I think there's a couple things we can do. For me, a big source of comparison is social media. So it's how can I use social media as a tool instead of as a crutch? And what I mean by a crutch is when I'm bored, pull out my phone to scroll through, or when I am sitting in the waiting room, I'll just have something to do, right? So being really intentional with our social media use, and also who we follow. Right? We got to remember all of these people are crafting perfect lives. And there's a bunch of people out there that are trying to share great messages, and curating our news feed to help with those people, or to have those people show up a little more, is crucial. So I think for comparison, the first thing is social media. Really look at your social media usage. But the second is, once you start aligning your own values and defining that purposeful life, and you start living that purposeful life, you start getting the confidence to align with your values. You stop comparing yourself to other people who maybe don't have the same values, because you know the direction you're headed, and that confidence can totally change your life.
Yeah, really well said, Tanner. I'm going to echo that. It's not only because we're humans, but also throwing social media into this conversation is so important. I feel like this is one area, Tanner, especially our generation, we're not exactly mindful of the way we use social media. And it's never in history have we constantly been shown, here's what this other person has, here's what this other person has. And so it's only natural that as we're exposed to it more, that we think about it more. It takes up more real estate in our minds. So I love the fact that you called that out. I want to ask you about this, because I feel like we do so mindlessly do so many things societally, culturally, in our own lives, that it may not always strike people to say, I want to reach out to a coach like Tanner. I want to actually work with someone in living a more purposeful life. What is that catalyst in the cases that you've seen for people who dive in and say, Tanner, let's do this. Let's make a change in my life. What's that defining moment or catalyst for them to make that decision?
Yeah, I think it's a little different for everyone. For me, so I work with a coach as well. For me, it was that breaking point, doing my PowerPoint at 1 or 2 in the morning and realizing what the heck is going on. For other people, it's a friend tapping them on the shoulder and saying, hey, maybe you should talk to this person. For other people, it's just following along and hearing the messaging and realizing, oh my gosh, I want this purposeful life. How do I do that? So I think the catalyst is a little different for everyone. I was going to wait till the end on this, Brian, but I'll give a little spoiler ahead. If you are someone who is on the fence and you don't know if you should reach out, you don't know about coaching, what I'm going to do is I will offer 10 of your listeners a free coaching session. If they email or they LinkedIn message me, Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur, I will sit down, we'll have an amazing session, and it'll be free of charge.
Dang, I'm not going to lie. That is absolutely epic, Tanner. That is super generous. We have a lot of guests who come on and they're generous, but 10 free coaching sessions for different listeners is an incredible offer. Listeners, you already know the links are going to be down in the show notes. Total spoiler alert. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. But even more broadly than that, Tanner, I want to ask, because for a lot of people, even that first step, you talk about first steps being part of the antidote of our current situations and taking us to a new reality and a new future. What does working with a coach even look like? I feel like that's probably scary for people who have never experienced it.
Yeah. So every coach is different. So find one that you really vibe with and that you like their model. But simply kind of what it looks like is we start out in this process, right? This is simple, not easy. We figure out where you want to go. I can help you get there, but you need to tell me where you actually want to go. And then we work together. We set 10-year, 1 year, and then quarterly goals. And every single quarter, we set very clear, smart goals. And we work together weekly, bi-weekly. I have a daily accountability program. And we just slowly chip away and we get closer to those goals each and every day.
Yeah, I love that. Tanner, as we come towards the end of this conversation here today, what I always cherish is not only talking to our guests as subject matter experts, which you are in your own field, as all of our guests are, but also recognizing that you're one of us. You're a fellow entrepreneur. So with your entrepreneurial hat on, all of our listeners in one way or another are on their entrepreneurial journey, some far ahead of others in monetary and growth terms as compared to others, but we're all continuously on that journey with regards to our businesses, our mindsets, everything that goes behind it. With that entrepreneurial hat on, what are some of those things, looking backwards, that you've had an accomplished career? You've made it in fields that people always dream of. What's unique about the entrepreneurial journey as it presents mindset challenges and obstacles for us to overcome?
Yeah, there's a bunch of unique things. A couple that come to mind is working alone is hard. So I know people that have co-founders, and that maybe takes a little bit of the burden, but also comes with some downsides. I think working alone, constantly motivating yourself. I have a coach, so that helps, but day in and day out, constantly motivating yourself is difficult. And you need to have, yes, you guessed it, systems and processes in order to do it. And besides that, the thing that I love the most is freedom of my schedule. Even if I work more hours, which probably right around the same as consulting, I get to decide what hours it is. So if it is a nice sunny day or a beautiful snow day on a Tuesday, then I can take off the afternoon and do that and make up the work somewhere else. So I think there are cons, but also a ton of pros. So it's really priorities. What are you looking for in your life?
Yeah, I love the way you answer that, Tanner, because when you said, if it's a beautiful snowy day, where my head immediately went was, I was like, oh, great, a great excuse to work 10 hours that day. And you said the exact opposite. So it goes to show our climate preferences between Montana and Florida here today. But I genuinely do love that, because so many of your answers here today, when we talk about living a more purposeful life, you do keep coming back to those systems and processes, which if we're just, it's right there in the word of purposeful, is that if we're just thinking these things will resolve themselves or take care of themselves, they're not. So we need to set ourselves up just like we do in business with processes and systems in life. So I really love that. It really illuminates the power of coaching. And for my final question in these episodes, I never know where guests are going to take it. And for you especially, I don't know where you're going to take it, because that is, what's that one takeaway? What's the one action? For listeners who tuned in here today, you dropped so many important questions for us to ask ourselves. You dropped so many important insights for us to practically implement in our own lives and in our own growth journeys. What's that one thing that you hope everyone walks away from today's episode and says, you know what, Tanner made me think about this, or Tanner encouraged me to actually do this, and it's time that I focus on it?
You're killing me, making me drop it down to only one thing. But if I'm going to do one thing, it'll be going back to the beginning, the first step. Write down where you want to go. A goal isn't a goal until it's written down. And the timelines that I like are 10-year and 1 year. tenure is far enough in the future where it's your North Star. It's where you're going. The road will be windy, but you'll at least have a North Star. 1 year is close enough where you can start chopping it down into pieces and actually getting to it. So write down right now, in 10 years, where do you want to be? And in 1 year, what can you do to get closer to that?
Yeah, really powerful. And that's why I put you in a box. I don't put you in a box in these conversations until the very end, Tanner, and you absolutely crush it because the goodness comes out. It really forces you as the guest to impart all of your brilliance into one action, which then makes it super actionable and intentional for our listeners. So listeners, Tanner laid a big action for us here at the end of today's session. So I absolutely love that challenge. It's something I'm personally going to do. And Tanner, I know that it's a natural segue into people who want to go deeper into your work. Drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Thanks, Brian. So my most active social channel is LinkedIn. So definitely follow along on LinkedIn. The other place to go is on turascoaching.com. And then finally, my weekly newsletter. I have that on both LinkedIn and on my website. So feel free to subscribe. And remember, 10 people, free coaching session. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Yes, super generous. Listeners, you already know the drill. You'll find those links down below in the show notes, wherever it is that you're tuning into today's episode. I'm also personally subscribing to Tanner's newsletter. This is a brilliant guy who's doing really intentional and purposeful work to make the world a better place by making our lives better and more purposeful. So if you want to get more goodness from Tanner, definitely go down, check those links in the show notes. Otherwise, Tanner, on behalf of myself and all the listeners, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. I had a blast.